I never forgot the sound of the rain that night. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. It hit the pavement in harsh slaps, bouncing off the concrete like it had a grudge against the world. I remember thinking that maybe the sky was crying on my behalf. Because I didn't have the strength to cry anymore. The door had slammed behind me just moments earlier. Loud, final, like a gavel. I was 24, fresh out of med school exams, and soaking wet in scrubs I hadn't even changed out of. My backpack, still slung over one shoulder, carried the heavy anatomy textbook I'd borrowed from the hospital library. I had just finished a double shift and raced back to the apartment, excited to tell Matthew the good news. I'd been offered an intern spot at St. Augustine's, the most competitive hospital in the region. Instead, I walked into a room full of suitcases. None of them were mine. "I think we're done, Sophia," Matthew had said, not looking me in the eye. This isn't working anymore. My father's right. You're not the right match for me. For my future." That word stung. The irony was bitter. I was the one who'd matched into the top residency program, while he, the son of the board member, had floated by with connections and confidence but little discipline. Still I begged. Not for love. Love had already bled dry, but for dignity. "I just need a place to stay until Monday," I said, soaking wet, my voice trembling. "I have nowhere else to go." But he didn't flinch. Didn't hesitate. He opened the door and shoved me out. The years that followed were rough. I crashed on friends' couches, worked overnight shifts, skipped meals to pay rent in a roach-infested sublet. But I never let go of one thing. The vision. The dream. Becoming Dr. Sophia Navarro. A trauma surgeon with steady hands and a heart that didn't crack under pressure. Took me 8 years. But I made it. Built a new life. And I buried the old one. I never thought I'd see Matthew again. It was a Tuesday when the ER call came in. I remember because I'd been eating a granola bar in the break room, finally sitting down after 12 straight hours of back-to-back cases. The hospital lights had flickered from a passing thunderstorm. Fitting, considering what was coming. "Incoming trauma," said Paige, one of our nurses, sticking her head in. Male, mid-30s. Collapsed in the hospital parking lot. BP's unstable. Vitals crashing. They think it's cardiac. I tossed the granola bar, tied my hair back, and snapped on my gloves. "Let's move," I said. The man on the gurney was pale. Gray lips. Shirt torn open by the paramedics. I snapped into action with the rest of the team, barking out orders, pressing on his chest, sliding in the fore. We shocked him. He finally regained a faint rhythm after the second round. "Get cardiology on standby," I ordered. "And prep for a full workup. We might need the cath lab." But then something caught my eye. Tattoo on his collarbone. Barely visible under the mess of sweat and medical tape. It was a compass rose. Small, sharp-lined. Just like the one Matthew had gotten on a whim during spring break senior year. Well, it couldn't be. I leaned in. That face. Older now, more worn but unmistakable. A scar over the right eyebrow that hadn't been there before. But the nose, the jawline. It was him. It was Matthew. I froze for half a second. Just half. Long enough for my stomach to twist, but not long enough for anyone to notice. Training kicked in. Kept my voice steady. My hands moved like they always did. Fast, deliberate, calm. We stabilized him. I didn't say a word to anyone about who he was. I didn't have to, because 10 minutes later he arrived. "Dr. Navarro," said a voice behind me, too familiar, too cold. I turned to see Robert Grayson, Matthew's father. The same man who had once told me, smiling condescendingly, that I was ambitious for a girl like you. He was a key board member at St. Augustine's, still powerful, still smug. He didn't look surprised to see me. "He's my son," he said. "I expect he'll receive the best care." "Of course," I said curtly. "He's receiving the same care we'd give anyone in his condition." "That's not what I meant," he said, stepping closer. "Look, I know we had our disagreements. But the past is the past. I trust you'll be professional. There was something behind his eyes. Something calculating. He nodded. I always am. But it wasn't the past, not really. Because when I reviewed Matthew's initial labs and EKG, something didn't add up. His condition mimicked a heart attack, but his enzyme levels were inconsistent. The arrhythmia wasn't classic. Something else was off. I ordered additional toxicology, just to be sure. Came back, changed everything. He'd been poisoned. Not dramatically. Not enough to kill immediately, but slowly, early. The kind of chemical compound that would have looked like a natural heart failure to someone less trained. It wasn't recreational. It was engineered. A beta blocker analog, modified and masked. Someone wanted him dead. I sat in my office that night, the report in hand, heart thumping harder than I wanted to admit. Did Matthew know? Was it self-inflicted? Or was someone trying to finish what they started that night in the rain? I had to tell someone. So I went to the only person in the hospital I trusted. Dr. Yasmin Kader, head of cardiology and my closest friend. She skimmed the toxicology results, eyes narrowing. This wasn't accidental, she murmured. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. He nodded. And then Yasmin asked the question that had already begun to claw at the back of my mind. Who would want Matthew Grayson dead? The hospital didn't sleep. Especially not on nights like that. I stood outside Matthew's ICU room, staring through the glass. Machines hummed steadily beside him. Lines and tubes webbed across his chest like an artificial lifeline. He was stable for now. But I couldn't shake the question. Who wanted him dead? More importantly, why now? It had been years since I'd seen him. Years since his father had personally overseen my removal from the life I had built with Matthew. The Graysons had resources, power, and enemies. But something about this didn't feel corporate or random. Felt personal. Yasmin and I stayed late in the on-call room, poring over his chart, retracing steps, comparing toxicology reports, and reviewing security footage from the hospital parking lot. That's when we saw it. A blurry figure approaching Matthew's car just before he collapsed. No face, no clear ID. But the person leaned in through the driver's side window for several seconds. Then they walked away, cool as glass. Could be anyone, Yasmin said, squinting. But my gut was already screaming. There was a tightness in my chest I couldn't explain, a pull that made my palms sweat. I need to speak to his wife, I said suddenly. Her name was Claire. Claire Grayson. I remembered seeing her once in a photo years ago in a social column. Polished, elegant, too perfect to be real. She arrived the next morning in designer flats and a trench coat, her lipstick too red for a hospital room. She looked at me like she was trying to place a memory that wouldn't come. I'm Dr. Navarro, I said, voice smooth. Your husband's trauma surgeon. She blinked. Of course. Thank you for saving him. Her voice was practiced, almost bored. Got straight to the point. Do you know if your husband had any enemies? Anyone who'd want to hurt him? She tilted her head. Is that part of the treatment plan? No denial. No surprise. That told me everything. I found traces of a toxic substance in his system, I said calmly. It mimics heart failure. If we hadn't caught it in time, he'd be dead. Now her expression changed. Fear. Real fear. But not for him. For herself. I didn't know, she stammered. I thought he was just tired. Stressed. He's been distant. How distant? Yes. She hesitated. We've been living separate lives for months. He moved into the guest house. His father's been furious about it. Of course Robert Grayson would be furious. He had an empire to protect. And Matthew was the heir. Later that day, I reviewed Matthew's private patient profile. There were encrypted notes, confidential psych evals, and one flagged chart from a cardiology visit 6 weeks earlier, marked sensitive access only. The notes were brief. Patient reports persistent fatigue, dizziness, and occasional arrhythmia. Suspect stress. Blood work normal. No further testing authorized. Requested discretion. But the signature at the bottom wasn't from his usual physician. It was from Dr. Leonard Voss. And Voss had disappeared 2 weeks ago. Yasmin and I tracked down Voss's temporary office assignment. It had been emptied, files shredded, digital records wiped. That's when I got a message. A burner number. 1 line of text. He's not who you think he is. Neither is his father. Don't dig unless you're ready. No name. No traceable metadata. But the fact that it came to me directly confirmed what I already knew. Someone is watching. By the 3rd day, Matthew regained consciousness. I was there when he opened his eyes. He blinked against the lights, dry lips parting, heartbeat beeping steadily beside him. I watched his eyes scan the room, then land on me. He stared for a long moment. And then, "Sophia!" His voice cracked. I didn't answer right away. I was flooded. Memories of rain, of betrayal, of the night he chose silence over standing up for me. But I kept my posture firm. "You had a cardiac crisis," I said clinically. "We found toxic agents in your system. You were minutes from death." He coughed, winced. "You saved me." I nodded once. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. "You shouldn't be alive," I answered. He tried to sit up but failed. His face looked older than I remembered. Weaker. There was something hollow in his expression. Not just fear. Not just guilt. Regret. "Was it Claire?" he asked quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "You think your own wife poisoned you?" He looked away. "I don't know. Maybe her, maybe my father." I stopped playing their game. "That's enough to make me disposable." I leaned in, voice low. "What game, Matthew?" He hesitated. There was a deal. Years ago. My father needed capital. He promised parts of the hospital. Ownership, land, development contracts, in exchange for campaign donations. But the contracts were hidden. My chest tightened. "How hidden?" "In my name," he said, choking slightly. "He used me as a front." But I started asking questions. Got access to accounts. Saw how much was moving under the table. "And you threatened to expose it." I told him I was going to the board. His eyes were watery now. I shouldn't have said anything. It all clicked. Robert Grayson had tried to protect his legacy by removing me years ago. But now his own son was a liability. And liabilities in the world of old money and power were erased. Quietly, permanently. I filed a confidential incident report that night. Marked every finding, every conversation. Made multiple copies. Uploaded one to a secure cloud. Gave another to Yasmin, sealed. Just in case. I didn't sleep that night. Because something told me they wouldn't wait long. And I was right. The next day Matthew coded again. No warning. No symptoms. Full cardiac arrest. We shocked him once. 3 times. He came back barely. But the test results came back with something new. A spike in the very same synthetic compound we had flushed from his system 2 days ago. This wasn't residual. This was fresh. It had been administered again. There were only 3 people who had access to his room that night. Blair. A junior nurse who had just been rotated in. Robert Grayson. I pulled the security footage. And what I saw shattered every assumption I had left. It wasn't Claire. It wasn't the nurse. It was Robert. In hospital scrubs, posing as staff. Injecting something into the foreline. Methodical. Like he'd done it before. I took the footage to the hospital's internal legal counsel. They promised to handle it. Promised to escalate. Promised discretion. But I didn't trust promises anymore. I made one more copy. And I left the hospital early. 'Cause I had a contact. Someone who owed me a favor. Someone who worked at the State Medical Review Board and still remembered what the Graysons did to me. The moment I stepped out of the hospital into the early dusk, I felt it. That eerie stillness before a storm. The air was too quiet. The sky too still. I wasn't sure if it was paranoia or instinct, but after what I'd seen on that security footage, I trusted my gut. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I took the long way. 5 different turns, 2 doublebacks, and 1 stop at a public library to log in from a secure terminal and upload the final copy of the video. If anything happened to me, I needed someone to find it. Because if Robert Grayson had the nerve to walk into an ICU room dressed as a nurse and try to kill his own son, then he wasn't just ruthless. He was desperate. And desperate men are dangerous. The next morning, hospital security called an emergency meeting. Robert was under investigation, they said. Internal only. No charges yet. No police. No press. They were protecting him. But the story had already slipped out. Because I sent the footage, anonymously, to a journalist I knew from college, now working for a major paper. Along with it, I sent encrypted files outlining the Grayson contract scheme, the shell companies, and the cover-ups linked to Matthew's name. And by noon, the headline was everywhere. Board member linked to attempted murder and hospital fraud. Son survives poisoning. Everything exploded. Robert was removed from his board seat within hours. Claire filed for separation the same day. And Matthew, he survived. He was still recovering, weak and shaken but alive. And when he saw the headline, he looked at me with something I hadn't seen since we were young. Real gratitude. But that wasn't the end. Because I wasn't done. 2 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom. Not as a defendant, not even as a witness, but as a medical expert brought in to explain the evidence before the court. Robert Grayson had been charged with attempted murder, medical fraud, obstruction of justice, and unlawful corporate misconduct. His lawyers were sharks. They tried to paint me as a vengeful ex with an agenda. But facts are louder than insinuations. And when the judge reviewed the video of Robert dressed in scrubs, entering a restricted ICU room with a syringe in his hand, silence fell over the courtroom like a curtain drop. It was damning. But it wasn't until I brought up the next piece of evidence that the real silence hit. Your Honor, I said calmly, handing over a flash drive. This contains footage and document records showing that Mr. Grayson not only orchestrated his son's poisoning, but also attempted to sabotage my medical career years ago in retaliation for my refusal to sign a confidentiality clause regarding early financial irregularities in the hospital board. Gasps echoed in the gallery. 'Cause no one knew that part. Not even Matthew. He looked at me then, stunned. I didn't flinch. Because I wasn't here for vengeance. I was here for the truth. For the years I'd spent building myself back up from nothing. For the girl he tossed into the street in the rain. And for every other woman who had been told to stay quiet while powerful men erased them. The judge admitted the evidence. Robert's face paled. His legal team stumbled. And in the end, he took a plea deal. 5 years. Stripped of all hospital influence. Fined into financial oblivion. Matthew, for his part, testified during the sentencing. He apologized publicly. I was a coward, he said. She saved my life. Once in the ER and once in this courtroom. But I didn't do it for him. I didn't even nod. I walked out of that courtroom into sunlight, not rain. For the first time in years I felt weightless. And as I stepped off the courthouse steps, a young woman brushed past me and whispered, "You gave me the courage to file my own case." She disappeared into the crowd before I could ask her name. But I smiled, because that's what justice does. Ripples. A month later, I was offered a position on the hospital ethics board. I declined. I opened my own trauma fellowship program instead. One that prioritized ethics, access, and second chances. Not just for patients, but for doctors like me who'd been pushed out, silenced, and forgotten. And as for Matthew, he sent a letter. It said he'd moved out of state. That he was trying to live a quieter life. That he hoped one day I'd forgive him. I folded the letter. Didn't reply. Because some things don't need closure. Some things close themselves. Especially when you walk away standing. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story and tell us where you're watching from.